Today we're talking about Jewish people fighting for their lives. But the year's not 2023, the year is somewhere closer to about 480 BC. And we're talking about the Persian King Xerxes. Yes, the same Xerxes who invaded Greece, and we have the famous battle of Thermopylae and the 300 Spartans. You see, something that I really want to emphasize to folks is the fact that self-defense and private citizens possessing weapons are not something new. It is something that's actually quite ancient and found all across the world in history and faith traditions. The Bible and other religious scriptures, as well as ancient texts, both faith-based and secular laws from around the world, support the right to an armed self-defense. In this series of videos, we'll be exploring these texts and cultures to learn from our ancestors about the moral and legal foundations for meeting force with force. I hope you get something out of it. I hope you join me in the discussion section in the comment field. And without further ado, let's get into it. So the two readings that we're going to be looking at today both come from the book of Esther and are from the same story within that book. Esther is a book found in the Christian Old Testament and is one of the 24 books of the Jewish Bible. The background is quite important, and I will try to give a brief but fair summary, even if it's not in the highest resolution. It is important to mention that scholarship has not settled on many of these exact dates, and I'm also leaving out various details for sake of brevity, while balancing historical accuracy and the overall narrative structure. There are always more details that could be included. I realize that. I also apologize for all of the mispronunciations. Let's get into some background. The book of Esther is largely a historical account of the Jewish people living in what is today modern-day Persia. We're talking about Iraq. We're talking about Western Iran and Iran. After the northern kingdom of Israel had fallen to the Assyrians around the year 732 BC. King Sargon II of the Assyrian Empire had forcibly deported and relocated about a fifth of the Jewish population, or about 20% of the 10 tribes that composed the northern kingdom, with the other two tribes composing the southern kingdom of Judea. And they took those 20% and basically scattered them across Mesopotamia, roughly located in and around modern-day Iraq. Then in 626 BC, the Babylonians, the new ascendant superpower in the region, were able to conquer the Assyrians. And later in 586 BC, the Babylonians finished the job that the Assyrians had begun by conquering the southern kingdom of Judah and deporting the remaining two tribes. Finally, to catch up to our story, the Persian Empire conquered the Babylonian Empire around 539 BC, and it is the Persian Empire where our story sits. Now, all this time, across hundreds of years and dozens of generations later, the identity of the Jewish people lived on as a community spread across the Assyrian, Babylonian, and finally the Persian empires. To better situate this story for a contemporary Western audience, as I mentioned in the introduction, if you ever heard of the story about the brave 300 Spartans who resisted the Persian King Xerxes in his invasion of Greece, the Battle of Thermopylae occurred in about 480 BC. Our story happens around the same time, starting only 3 years earlier in 483 BC, and the book of Esther, along with what most scholars today claim to be the same King Xerxes that invaded Greece, was featured in that book of Esther, though under a different name. So let's take a look at that story. A Jewish woman born Hadassah, but known largely to history by her Persian name Esther, is chosen by the king of Persia to become his queen, thanks to some assistance from her cousin Mordecai, who was a Jewish leader. Now, soon after this happens, her cousin Mordecai helps to thwart a plot against the king by warning Esther that there's certain people coming to kill the king. Now, at this point, Esther takes this information and basically warns her husband, the king, about what's going on in the plot against his life. As a result, the conspirators against the king's life are caught and killed. Now, you tend not to forget this sort of thing when you are a king, nor do you tend to forget the people who helped you stay alive. Sometime later, though, an advisor named Haman rose to power and became one of the favorites of the king. Esther's cousin somehow gets into it with Haman, and Haman takes the rather measured response of, "If you won't bow to me, then I will genocide your entire population and family." Evidently, Haman did not mess around, but neither did Mordecai, who evidently refused to bow. So Haman spoke to the king and said basically this: "King, look, you have these people living inside your kingdom who answer to another set of laws. This is not good. They won't listen to you, and they are not loyal to you or the kingdom. Why don't you let me take care of them for you? And the king said, sure, that's fine. So messengers were dispatched to kill all of the people, the Jews, scattered throughout different communities across the empire on a particular date. Now, once more, Mordecai learns of this planned attack and alerts Esther, who in turn went to her husband, the king. Esther pleads her case for her people and reasons with the king that, look, if Mordecai and the Jewish people wanted you dead, you would have already been dead because all we had to do is hold our tongues. All the Jewish people had to do was hold their tongues and let the assassins do their work. It was the same Jews that you just ordered to be destroyed that actually saved your life earlier. The king, as told in the book, finally awoke to the entire situation and understands that he has been deceived and swiftly takes care of Haman. Again, low resolution version. But there was a problem, a big problem. The kill orders had already gone out, and this was not something you could easily take back in any sense of the term. This was a kingdom stretching from India to Ethiopia, from Asia to Africa, and it ran on donkeys, horses, and camels. When you have already dispatched orders via swift carriers, the only remedy was to send a second wave of orders. But that leaves the problem of the gap. The time between the first orders arriving, saying to kill these people, and the time that it takes to get to the second batch of orders, saying, no, I'd rather not that you do that. Moreover, the king could not annul a royal decree once made, but he could add to it. So the king summoned his scribes and couriers and sent forth a new proclamation, as recorded in the book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 11. By these the king allowed the Jews, who were in every city, to gather and to defend their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them with their children and women, and to plunder their goods. So there's a lot to unpack here just from that one verse. What we did not see was the king telling people that they cannot defend themselves, that they must flee the lands rather than use force, or that they must first join the military or seek some sort of protection from outside of themselves. No, just the opposite. This story in the passage acknowledges the innate right to self-preservation and self-defense, not only in the order from the king of go forth and defend yourself, but further by another hidden but extremely important detail in the second verse. Before we get there, please be sure to hit that like button and of course stick around to the end for our quote of the day. Here's the second verse. It comes from the book of Esther, chapter 9, so the next chapter, verse 5. So the Jews smote all their enemies with the sword, slaughtering and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. Now, the extremely important detail that I want to focus your attention on is the English word sword. The Hebrew word was hereb. Those people, those husbands, those fathers, those sons, and likely maybe their spouses, daughters, see, they had swords. A sword is not just something that you can casually acquire on the internet and ship it to your door within 48 hours back then. Swords were very expensive, both on the account of how much raw material, the expensive metal that was required to be used in their construction, unlike a spear, which had measurably less, or a dagger that had measurably less metal by comparison, but also the amount of smithing that was needed to forge them properly, to ensure that they were strong enough to not bend, but not too brittle to break. These people evidently had possession and ownership of swords in the course of their daily lives. The sword is the original assault weapon, the pinnacle of deadly weapons of its day. This stresses the fact that they had access to not only the concept of self-defense, but importantly, the tools necessary to actualize it. This is important because it does not only highlight that people had access to the deadliest weapons of their time, but that principles are dead if stripped of the property that they manifest themselves by. After all, without the tools, the idea is empty and powerless. We need the ability to manifest an idea to give it power. The concept of free speech is meaningless if people have no right to record and transmit and absorb ideas, or to gather and speak them into being while others may listen. The right to self-defense is meaningless without the manifestation of that right in the tangible property, the tools, the weapons that allow people to enact that right. All rights fundamentally boil down to property rights. Never forget that. Ultimately, the Jewish people successfully defend themselves against their attackers, and the book of Esther claims that they killed 75,000 6,000 of their attackers across the empire, but were careful not to take any loot. This story in the book of Esther is not widely taught or known in Christian churches. However, it is prominently taught in synagogues the world over as the basis for the Jewish holiday of Purim, usually falling sometime around March on our modern Gregorian calendar. Now, ultimately, King Xerxes was assassinated well after the book of Esther ended, around the year 565 BC at the age of 53. It is unknown exactly what happened to Esther. However, after the death of Haman, Mordecai assumed a prominent role on the king's court. This story from the book of Esther paints a vivid picture, not only of the trouble at court and a brave and powerful woman working to save her people, but also of the ordinary lives and the property of people living in exile. It speaks to the power of that property, but also to the power of the spirit of the people who wield that property, those tools in their battle for self-preservation. Our quote of the day comes from Oscar Wilde, quote, "Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing." Thanks for sticking around to the end. I look forward to seeing you in the comments section. Don't forget to hit like, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.